UFC Vegas 74 betting and DraftKings show. We have 13 fights this weekend. I'm Jon Kelly. Let's hear the picks. Kicking things off in the light heavyweight division, we have Maxime Grishin, a -135 favorite. The comeback on Felipe Lins is +115. And this is one right off the bat that I'm looking to stay away from, both in the betting market and on DraftKings. I do lean Felipe Lins, especially on DraftKings, just due to the price. The first time this fight was booked, I was likely going to be betting Lins, but the price has shortened up since then when they rebooked it. But I just think this is a matchup where Grishin is always this guy who just doesn't seem to do enough to convincingly win rounds. He's not really the guy that's going to separate heavily because he throws low volume on the feet. Yes, he does have power, but if he's not hurting you or knocking you out, he's rarely going to look to grapple. And I just said he's not throwing a ton of volume, so he's one of those guys that just has thin margins. And then on the flip side, Felipe Lins, I basically never got this guy right since coming over from the PFL. He's been knocked out multiple times in his career, so the durability is certainly an issue, but he does have a BJJ black belt. But he's another guy, you don't really know if or when he's going to push that wrestling and grappling. So this is one where I could see it being kind of low volume, plotting, just doesn't score well. It's really coin flippy to me. I'm going to lean with Lins just because I'll likely have more exposure to him than Grishin on DraftKings. So we're going Lins by decision. That's the official pick. Next fight up in the bantamweight division, we have Luan Lacerda, a -150 favorite with the comeback on Damon Blackshear at +130. And this is an interesting matchup. I know there's a lot of love for Damon Blackshear out there. I didn't bet this fight, and the reason being, I do favor Lacerda. I think it's only a slight favorite, so I do think it's kind of getting overblown here. This could be one of the situations where we've seen time and time again where a fighter outperforms an expectation in a loss, and then they tend to be overrated their next fight in terms of the market. I think we're seeing at least a little bit of that here, but I do still slightly lean Lacerda, and the reason being is because Damon Blackshear is a guy who is a very well-rounded fighter. He's skilled pretty much everywhere. Definitely more of a grappler. He's landed at least one takedown in all of his fights. He's a good grappler on the mat as well. Good at reversing position. Never been submitted as well. So he's not a bad fighter, but he's one of those guys, again, who's unable to really separate and win rounds unless he's having that sustained grappling success. And I'm just not sure he's going to be able to do that here against Luan Lacerda. And I think on the feet, Lacerda is going to be much more active. I think he's going to be moving forward. I just think he's going to be getting ahead on the scorecards while the fight plays out on the feet. And then when they're grappling, I think he's the more opportunistic and dangerous submission grappler of the two. But I do think both guys are going to tangle. Both guys are going to have success reversing each other. Both of them probably getting on top for extended periods. So I think this is just going to be a really close fight, and I just slightly lean Lacerda just being the more dangerous fighter, the fighter with more finishing ability, and I slightly just expect him to be doing more on the feet in terms of the volume. So we're going Lacerda by decision. That's the official pick. Next up in the women's strawweight division, we have Elise Reed, a -130 favorite with the comeback on Jinyu Frey at +110. And this is one where I'm interested in the underdog here as well in Jinyu Frey, just because I think both of them are very low level. Jinyu Frey coming off a knockout loss to Polyana Viana. She's also 38 years old, so she's definitely, on the back end of her career. We're not really going to see many improvements from her, whereas Elise Reed still getting better, still getting more fights under her belt. I do think we could see improvements there, but I just can't get to this number because Elise Reed has always been somebody that, yes, she's got some tools on the feet. She's got some powerful kicks, but she just doesn't really throw enough of them. And then on the flip side, she's also very hittable. Her striking defense still needs improvement. But the biggest issue I have with Reed and why I can't get to her as a favorite in this matchup is because she defends takedowns at under 50%. We've seen time and time again, basically anybody that wants to take her down is going to be able to do so. And I expect Jinyu Frey coming off a loss, maybe getting her walking papers if she gets another loss here. I expect her to come in with the right game plan. She's shown she's capable of landing takedowns in the past. And on the feet, I just expect to be very competitive. I actually think Jinyu Frey is a much harder hitter in terms of her boxing. And then I expect her to be able to clinch up and take down Elise Reed. So if the fight's going to be close on the feet and Jinyu Frey's landing the harder shots and she has the wrestling upside, I certainly have to believe that she's going to be edging it on the judges' scorecards, even as a slight underdog. We're going Jinyu Frey by decision. That's the official pick. And next up in the lightweight division, we have Jamie Mullarkey is now the biggest betting favorite on the card at -500. The comeback on UFC newcomer Muhammadjon Naimov is plus 400. And this is one where I really don't have to go into too much detail because the way this was booked originally was against Guram Kutaladze in this fight. So Malarkey was a big underdog. So he's priced under 7K, and now he's the biggest favorite on the card. So really, it doesn't matter what I say about the matchup. Everybody is expecting him to win here, and everybody is expecting to play him on DraftKings. He's going to have maybe the highest ownership we've ever seen, and for good reason. I'm probably not going to fully just lock him. I certainly will in my high dollar contest, most likely, but in terms of the main GPP, I'm always a guy that's willing to sprinkle the other side if there's going to be massive leverage, and I think that's what we have here. I don't expect Nemov to win, but if he somehow, lands a big shot early, we've seen Malarkey stung and hurt and knocked out multiple times, so it wouldn't be impossible, but I think that's his very narrow path to victory, is he has to clip him early and hurt him. If he doesn't do that, I think Malarkey absolutely paces him. This guy's not much of a defensive grappler. Malarkey averages over 2.5 takedowns per 15 minutes. I'm interested in Malarkey round 2, round 3 props. If the fight gets there, I expect him to keep his foot on the gas pedal and get Nemov out of there. So we're going Malarkey inside the distance. That's the official pick. In terms of DraftKings, he's basically a free square. So it just depends what your risk tolerance is. I'd say if you're playing 5 or less lineups, then you just lock him, take the free square. If you're playing 10 or more and something like that, especially in the bigger contests like the main tournament, man, I don't think it's a bad idea to have maybe just 1 or 2 of Nemov, just because you are going to have massive leverage, which again, that's what's going to separate you in these large field contests where all the money's up top. So we're going Malarkey inside the distance. That's the official pick. And next fight up, we have Jon Castaneda, a minus 125 favorite. The comeback on Muin Gafarov is plus 105. And this one is certainly surprising. I think the line movement has surprised me. I expected Castaneda to be a wider favorite in this matchup, and I'm likely going to be betting him. It's just a matter of when and for how much, because I do think he's the more well-rounded fighter here. I do think he's going to have multiple advantages, the main one being the cardio, because Gafarov's a guy who you probably recognize him if you've watched my Dana White Contender Series stuff in the past. Then you know that 2 years ago he fought Chad and Hellinger in week 2 of that season in 2021. I actually backed him as a big favorite. I think I bet him at minus 225 or something like that, beat the line movement by a lot, and he ended up dropping a split decision there. He did have some moments of success, mainly with the grappling. He landed 5 takedowns in that fight, and this is a guy who comes from a high-level grappling background. He's a 2-time world champion in combat sambo, fighting out of Tajikistan. He's also got 10 of his 18 wins coming by knockout, so he has a big overhand right. He's got some tools, no doubt about it. I'd be much more worried about him if this were a full camp, because even in that Contender Series fight, what we saw was he wasn't able to manage the gas tank. And now coming in on short notice against a fighter who we know has solid cardio and a very well-rounded skill set in Castaneda, who's good wherever the fight goes. And the one thing that I'll say is Castaneda struggles to defend takedowns. He's around 60%. So I do think Gafarov can get him down. I don't think Gafarov can hold him down, because Castaneda historically is very good at working back to his feet. He's a solid scrambler as well. And I just think that cardio dynamic is really going to favor him as the fight gets extended. And I think that's what happens here. So we're going Castaneda by submission, because Gafarov's a guy who, when he shoots on those takedowns, he tends to leave his neck out there. He kind of has that Tony Gravely disease where he tends to do that. He hasn't paid the price yet, but I think Castaneda has the tools to possibly do that on Saturday. So we're going Castaneda by submission. That's the official pick, and this is a great fight to target on DraftKings, because I think regardless of who wins, they're probably going to score very well. Next fight up in the heavyweight division, we have Dontel Mays, a minus 135 favorite. The comeback on Andrei Arlovsky is plus 115, and this is one, like, I have to ask, like, what are we doing still interested in backing Dontel Mays, especially as a favorite? I think it's absolutely absurd, the love that this guy has from the MMA community. And I was a part of that love against Hamdeh Abdelwahab, and obviously that was super embarrassing. Everyone was bashing their head against the wall for that one. But it's easy for me to jump ship once I've seen all that I need to see. And I think we've seen all that we need to see from Dontel Mays to know that he is just not a good fighter. He's a bottom of the barrel guy. And what we have on the other side is Andrei Arlovski, who, yes, he has some concerns, mainly the durability. He's been knocked out 11 times in his career, and the dude can't really defensively grapple either. You know, he's lost a couple times more recently by submission, but he's still a good striker. He's solid defensively. He's much more technical than Don'Tale Mayes. I think Mayes has to knock him out to win this fight, and I don't really expect that to happen. Yes, I know Arlovski's been knocked out a bunch, but not really recently. He hasn't been knocked out since that Rosenstruck fight back in 2019. And I just don't think Don'Tale Mayes is a guy that really has that big of a threat. He's not throwing a ton of volume on the feet. He's not really doing much at all. You know, we basically only seen him go to the wrestling just once in that Josh Parisian fight, who can't wrestle anybody. So I think that fight was more of an outlier because we've also seen him just get out-wrestled by multiple opponents. So I'm just not even sure that A, he's going to come in looking to wrestle, and B, that he's even going to have success doing that. So I don't get the love for Don'Tale Mayes here. I think Andrei Arlovski is much more proven. I think he's much more trustworthy. And if we have a close fight where Arlovski's landing the cleaner punches, doing a little bit more, has the jab working for him, and Mayes just isn't going to look to take him down, then I think Arlovski's going to clearly win it on the judges' scorecards. So we're going Arlovski by decision. That's the official pick. Next fight up, we have one of the more intriguing matchups on the card in terms of excitement. I think because of the way that one guy fights in particular, we have Daniel Willie Cat Santos, a minus 215 favorite, with Johnny Munoz Jr. on the comeback at plus 185. I think this is also a great fight to target on DraftKings because regardless of who wins, they both have a very clear path to victory. On one hand, you have Santos, who's a much better striker. He's always looking to push a pace, move forward with that pressure, that volume, and that knockout power. He's going to throw a lot of spinning techniques as well. He's hunting for a knockout finish. His one weakness is typically his defensive grappling, and that's where Johnny Munoz Jr. can take advantage. He averages nearly 2.5 takedowns per 15 minutes. He holds a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I think that's his path to victory, is multiple takedowns and potentially a submission. And I think if it stays on the feet, though, he's going to be outgunned on the feet. He's not going to be able to deal well with that pressure. And I don't even really fully trust his durability either. So this is one where I'm going to target both sides because they both have clear upside. But the official pick is going to be Santos by TKO. I think he gets it done in the second or third round here. And that's the official pick. Which brings us to our featured bout on the prelims. We're in the welterweight division as Abubakar Nurmagomedov comes in as minus 110. Pick him against Elizeu Zaleski dos Santos. And like I said, I mean, this one's priced where it is because on one hand, we have Nurmagomedov, who hasn't really put together that inspiring of a run here in the UFC. He formerly fought over in PFL, and he has a bunch of finishes on the Russian regional scene. But since coming over to the UFC, he hasn't really been much of a finishing threat. And then on the flip side, Dos Santos, we know is a capable finisher. We saw that. We nearly saw that in his last time out at UFC 267. I was at that card in Fight Island back in 2021, and that was the fight against Benoit Saint Denis where any other referee would have stopped it. I actually had a bet on Dos Santos inside the distance in that fight, so it still tilts me to this day because, I mean, any other referee would have stopped that fight probably multiple times, but it ended up going to a decision, and then he got the victory. But he's coming off a long layoff now because he failed a drug test as well. He is an aging fighter. He turns 37 years old later this year, so even though Nurmagomedov is kind of one of those thinner margin guys because he just doesn't really have a ton of output, he's not really going to blow anyone away, I do think this is probably competitive on the feet. And then those takedowns of Nurmagomedov could potentially be the difference here in swinging the round. So I am going to slightly lean him, but it's another one where I'm going to look to have exposure to both sides on DraftKings. The official pick is going to be Nurmagomedov by decision. And kicking off the main card, we're in the women's flyweight division as Karine Silva is a minus 225 favorite. The comeback on Ketlin Souza is plus 190. And Souza is making her UFC debut. She previously fought over in Invicta. She seems to be a pretty well-rounded fighter. I do think she can at least compete at the UFC level, but I do think she's going to struggle with the physicality of the bigger Karine Silva in this matchup. Silva's a fighter who previously fought on Dana White's Contender Series. She's not a great minute winner, but she is a dangerous finisher, especially for this division. She's a big girl girl. She's got big power in her right hand, and she will look to throw that, especially early in fights. And she's also an opportunistic submission grappler. She has a good guillotine choke that she'll look for as well. You know, she has her holes in terms of her round winning ability, especially if she's facing people that can look to take her down. But I don't think that's what's going to happen here. And again, I keep going back to the physicality and the power difference in this matchup. And I think ultimately that's going to be the difference here. We've seen her get swarmed in the past. She's been knocked out in 2 of her 3 career losses. And I think that's probably what happens here. If Silva starts to land those big right hands, I think it's going to be enough to get her out of there. So we're going Silva by TKO. That's the official pick. Next fight up in the flyweight division, we have Tim Elliott, a minus 180 favorite with the comeback on Victor Altamirano is plus 155. And this is a matchup that I'm very excited for. It seems like this is maybe the people's main event this week because of the outside of the octagon issues that we've seen surface on social media by Tim Elliott. So obviously we got a lot of people rooting for him this week. I actually have interest in the underdog here though, in Victor Altamirano. I expect Tim Elliott to come looking to put a pace on him. Altamirano's no stranger to a high-paced, high-variance fight. That's typically what he thrives in. I've referred to him as the budget version of Brandon Royval in the past because that's very similar to how he fights. He's looking to move forward and really just spam volume. He fights with his hands down. He's just looking to throw volume, you know, mix it up, get in there, and just make things happen. And I think Tim Elliott is not going to shy away from that. In fact, I think he's going to really enjoy that. I think these guys put on a show. Elliott, you know, if he goes to the wrestling, and I do think he probably does eventually, I think he could definitely have success with that. He averages over 3.5 takedowns per 15 minutes. We know Altamirano can give up takedowns, but I just expect Altamirano to have a clear advantage on the feet. I think he has the potential to hurt Tim Elliott on the feet. We haven't really seen him knocked out all that much, but he's been wobbled and stung. He said in interviews how he didn't even remember portions of some of his fights dating back a couple years. So there is no reason to think why Altamirano can't land something big or even like a club and sub scenario, because Elliott's another guy who, when he's in on those takedowns, you might be able to snatch up a neck on him. So I actually like the underdog here. I like the under as well. I do think this fight scores very well on DraftKings. We've seen Elliott in the past, you know, years ago, put up the biggest score we've ever seen on DraftKings. So we know he has the upside, and we've seen Altamirano put up some big scores as well. And I think this one probably ends early. So I like the under, and I like the dog here on Altamirano. We're going Altamirano by submission. That's the official pick. And next fight up, we have another interesting dynamic for DraftKings, because this was originally supposed to be Jim Miller and Jared Gordon, but Gordon just recently had to pull out of the fight, and now he's being replaced by some guy named Jesse Butler. And I honestly don't know much about this guy. I mean, from what I saw just really quickly before I started recording, he doesn't look terrible, but I don't expect him to be the favorite here against Jim Miller. I think Jim Miller is probably going to have a striking advantage, at least while he has the cardio, and I think he could definitely, potentially submit this guy as well. So I like Jim Miller's upside, and at 7,100 on DraftKings, now we have a situation where two guys, because we've already mentioned the Jamie Malarkey thing at 6,700. Now we have two guys who are likely going to be sizable favorites, and both of them priced as some of the cheapest fighters on the slate. So yes, they're great plays, but just keep in mind that you can't just play Malarkey, Miller, and then all the expensive and popular fight, like go one of the main event and then 3 upper 8K, 9K guys. Like, that's going to be the most popular build, the most duplicated build. You're just not going to separate and win tournaments playing that way. So keep that in mind. Maybe only take one of those free squares and then take one of the other side where basically nobody's going to play him, and then mix and match from there. You have to be creative with those constructions, because everybody's just going to jam in Malarkey, Miller, one of the main event, and then your expensive fighters that everybody likes. So just keep that in mind. Miller's a great play, but just don't get too crazy with who you're matching him with, because that's going to be a very, very popular build this weekend. Which brings us to the co-main event, as Alex Caceres comes in as a minus 180 favorite with Daniel Pineda on the comeback at plus 155. And this is kind of funny because Alex Caceres is never really a guy that you want to back as a sizable favorite. He's just another one of those fighters that really has thin margins, because outside of a finish, he's not a great round winner. He's not throwing a ton of volume. He keeps a decent pace on the feet, but he's not blowing guys away with his power. The one thing I like about Caceres is because of his kind of awkward fighting style, he's just a guy that makes it tough for his opponents to look great against him because they're just typically not landing flush because of the way that he moves, the way he plays defense, and he's a good submission grappler as well. And then on the flip side, Daniel Pineda, we know he's known as like typically a round one or bust fighter, a kill or be killed style of fighter, dating back all through his PFL days as well. Obviously had the PED suspension that he served, but he's still the same guy, a guy that's typically not winning fights until he wins fights. And we saw that in the Tucker Lutz performance where he was losing, and then had a big shot and ended up, finishing the fight. That's who he is. He's not a good round winner, not a good minute winner, but he is very opportunistic, and you can't count him out because he's dangerous in those first 5 to 7 minutes. Outside of that, he basically wilts. You can take this guy out of there. So I think this one, in terms of the over-under, it basically just comes down to if Caceres is going to stay aggressive as the fight goes on, because I do expect him to take over as the fight goes on. I'm just not sure if he's going to keep his foot on the gas pedal. He's not typically a guy like Malarkey, who we know is just going to gas pedal through 15 minutes if he needs to. Caceres, if he's up, he might just try to cruise a little bit. That wouldn't shock me, but it also wouldn't shock me if Pineda is just so out of the fight by then that he gives up, a choke or whatever. So we're going Caceres by submission. I'm kind of indifferent on whether or not he gets the finish or not, but we are going Caceres. I know it doesn't feel good as a minus 180 favorite. I'm not going to bet him, but he is the official pick because I do think he takes over as the fight goes on. Which brings us to our flyweight main event as Kai Kara-France takes on Amir Albazi. This one is also lined as a pick'em, and I think this is one where I'm just going to go with the experience, the more proven guy in Kai Kara-France, who we know can fight at the highest level of this division. Now, it's not to say that Albazi can't. We just haven't seen it yet because he hasn't been tested at this level. So this is a great dynamic, a great matchup. What we've seen from Albazi so far, this is a prospect who I am excited about. I do think he has a high ceiling in the UFC, and he's basically run through the lower level tiers of this division. But let's not kid ourselves here. This dude's beaten Malcolm Gordon, Francisco Figueiredo, Zhalgas Zhumagulov, and Alessandro Costa in his most recent fight. These guys are very low-level fighters, coming off Contender Series, coming over with basically no UFC level experience, where, I don't think him running through those fighters and fighting competitively against Zhumagulov, I don't think that warrants him being a pick'em against one of the best fighters in this division in Kai Kara-France. Yes, I think Albazi will have a grappling advantage. I'm not sure it's going to be so drastic. I'm not sure that he's going to be able to take Kai Kara-France down so easily. Kai Kara-France historically has good takedown defense, and he's very difficult to control on the mat as well. He's a good scrambler and has solid submission defense. So I don't think that this is going to be some sort of blowout where Albazi just comes in, takes him down, mat returns repeatedly, and submits him. Like, Kai Kara-France has been there against the best grapplers in this division, and he's been fine with them for the most part. And then on the feet, I think Kai Kara-France is the better striker. I think he's going to be throwing more volume. I think he's much more powerful. He's known as being one of the hardest hitters in the division. And I just think he's much more proven at the highest level of the division. Albazi historically is actually a slow starter. Outside of those 2 first-round subs against bums, he typically starts slow. In the Zhalgas fight, he was outlanded in the first round. Yes, he took over as the fight went on. Really wasn't all that impressive in terms of the 29-28 victory. And then Alessandro Cortez, again, in round 1, this dude does not look like the stud prospect that he's being billed at in this matchup. If you start slow against Kai Kara-France, he's going to get up on the scorecards. He's more proven over 5 rounds. He's not an easy guy to grapple. I'm just not sure where this massive amount of respect is coming from in terms of Albazi being priced as a pick'em here. I don't think he's going to be able to submit Kai Kara-France. I don't think he's going to be able to hurt him on the feet. I really favor Kai Kara-France in this fight, and I think that's going to prove itself as the fight goes on, especially if we see this fight get extended. I might be interested in an over here. I'm definitely on the Kai Kara-France side. I think Kai Kara-France by decision is the official pick, and I think that's the most likely outcome come Saturday. And as always, guys, fightnumbers.com will have my DraftKings player rankings broken down by salary tier. It'll have ownership projections as well. That's all updated by Saturday morning. Check it out. It's completely free. I'll pin it in the comments as well. Appreciate the support. Best of luck, and we'll see you guys next time.